Welcome to Get Wisdom Live with Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. What if God was also a co-host? What if the historically rare ability to question God directly and get profound answers back has been rediscovered? What would God say to today's sophisticated but deeply troubled world? Get Wisdom Live is here to share those answers with you. Here is Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom Live. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. This week, Creator shares lessons from the life of Joan of Arc. Most everyone has heard of Joan of Arc, and I am no exception. I know she's a Catholic saint. There are lots of schools and churches with her name on them. She lived in the Middle Ages and died a martyr's death, being burnt at the stake. But until just the last couple of weeks, I didn't know much beyond that, Carl.
Well, I think we need the backdrop first so people appreciate who this person was. And, I frankly, when you proposed doing this and sent these questions off to me to channel about it, I of course know about Joan of Arc, quote unquote, but I don't recall the details. And I learned about her at a point in my life when I wasn't such a strong believer in the divine. And I had a spiritual awakening later on. And I know from the perspective of non-believers, someone like her is easily dismissed as somebody who's delusional, somebody who just is maybe over-believing in a fantasy and somehow got some support and traction and that helped carry them forward. But there's nothing more to it than that. This is someone who was just overzealous and was used for political purposes or military purposes. But there's much more to it. And I'm excited to be a part of this because I think it is important.
Well, let's set the background so that people understand the context upon which Joan of Arc enters history. During the conversation we had the other day, you said it was you wrote back saying, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And in some cases, I think this is every bit as epic and as anything that George Lucas would have thought up as far as the story goes. So a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, from the mid-1300s to the mid-1400s, was the 100 Years' War in France. This consisted largely of generations of extremely politically weak French kings who were almost wholly controlled by French princes or dukes that fought endless military battles among themselves for the power to control the king and essentially rule in the king's name. In doing so, they all pandered to and courted the English to side with them in destroying their fellow French political enemies. This went on and on and on and on without end. Move forward to September 10th, 1419, the heir to the French throne, Charles VII, was framed for the murder of his uncle, the Duke of Burgundy. As a result, his mentally incapacitated, psychotic father, King Charles VI, who had murdered 5 of his courtesans in a psychotic rage years earlier, was talked into formally disowning his youngest son and heir and recognizing the King of England as acting regent or ruler. With this new arrangement, Henry V would marry Charles VI's daughter, Catherine, and together they gave birth to a new English and French heir, Henry VI. As a result, France was divided into 2 warring camps with a foreign power supporting and aiding one side of the conflict. That's very similar to the situation we see in Ukraine today, where you have Ukrainians fighting Ukrainians and Russia invading to support one side of the conflict. So, back in medieval France, one side, led by the disinherited French heir Charles VII, and the other, led by his now fully English-controlled father, Charles VI, with English King Henry V, who, by the way, Shakespeare wrote a play about, so he's a famous character in his own right, actually ruling as regent. 3 years later, King Henry V dies, and 7 weeks after that, the French King Charles VI also dies. Now there is no King of France at all, as the heir Charles VII was disinherited, and there is no English regent or king, as the young English heir, Henry VI, is but a toddler. Into this political disaster area affecting both England and France, the creator and divine realm inserts Joan of Arc, February 23rd, 1428, whose divine mission it is to get the wrongfully disinherited heir, Charles VII, coronated and restored as king and ruler of France, and also drive the English out of France once and for all. Not a small list of to-dos, Carl.
No, and this is an example of something that does resonate this very moment in history, and is so typical of how the arc of uh, cultural growth and development to get a world, some would say, is overpopulated. It's heavily populated by old standards, but we're still struggling. We're still fighting with one another. And on a large scale, multiple nations warring and going into combat, and all the pain and suffering that results is a huge drag on human progress. And it turns out that's no accident. And that's why a divine intervention is so very needed, because many times it's the only thing that will help make things better.
Absolutely. You were telling me about what you had heard. You had a discussion with your wife about how Joan of Arc entered the picture and was put to her first test. That was interesting.
Well, she had a vision of coming to save the day. This sounds nuts, from the standpoint of most people, but she was divinely inspired, and we verified this. And so I was telling my wife we're putting this show together about Joan of Arc, and she said, "Well, I remember that quite well." And she knew about the different warring factions and that. And she said that the thing that sticks out in her mind is how Joan went to the court of the king, and he was in disguise. They weren't sure she was authentic. And so the king dressed as a commoner and mingled with the assembly, and she went up and knelt in front of him, because she was guided to know who the true king was.
Yes.
And that was a big part of the convincer, to give her some authority militarily to be of assistance.
Well, we have set the stage, Carl, so we're going to dive into the questions and get creators' response on a number of things. So here we go. The questions for this show are inspired by the book Joan of Arc, A History by Helen Castor. We have learned that nothing happens in terms of divine intervention without a human intention. Castor wrote, Marie Robin, the peasant woman who had received divinely inspired visions at Avignon in the last years of the 14th century, had had many revelations concerning the calamities that would affect the kingdom of France. She had been terrified by a vision of great quantities of armor, fearing that she would be required to put it on and fight. But she had been told it was not for her. Instead, a maid would come after her who would bear these arms and deliver France from its enemies. So the life of Joan of Arc was foreseen before she was even born. We know about retrocausal healing, where the prayers said in the future can heal the past. Are mission lives, such as Joan's, a retrocausal intervention planned and executed in response to desperate prayers said by those grievously suffering in the future? What can Creator tell us?
Right, and this is what I channeled from Creator of all it is. These are Creator's words. This is truly an inspired notion you are probing here, because retrocausal healing is part and parcel of what the divine realm will do to work on a dilemma, particularly large ones that have no ready solution in the moment. Many times, in response to ongoing circumstances, the divine will utilize the pleas and cries for help, and especially prayers launched with a divine intention to be brought to bear for rescue or sustenance or healing, and certainly the alleviation of suffering, will go into the past to work on the circumstances bringing a difficult situation to a head. That is because it is easier to fix something not already broken by preventing that breakage if possible, working in the past for the underlying currents bringing it into being in the future. The illusion of time you live within seems to be linear, and that the past is a foregone conclusion. The current moment holds the dilemma, And the future at times seems only a faint hope something might change for the better. So you think of what you are doing, that your prayers are to be applied in the here and now, as you see it, and for benefiting of the future yet to come. When we see your prayers for assistance is often best answered by a return to the past to begin to work on to undo the current dilemma, or at least soften things up in some way, making a current applied healing intervention more likely to bring about a swifter resolution than if we start from scratch in the current moment to fix what is broken or about to break. And that might well be imminent, given that oftentimes people turn to the divine when there is great stress, great fear, or even ongoing carnage, and the people are desperately seeking an answer, some kind of divine rescue. Going into the past to pave the way for a resolution of current circumstances is, in fact, a common sense and sensible approach that can pay many, many, many dividends. So you are right on target here that many times situations of great seriousness that are often a large event involving many, many individuals and may well in the bargain represent a potential turning point for a victory or defeat of something underway will be worked on avidly by the divine across timelines, because that is the surest way to speed up the process of bringing relief to bear. It will not be seen as such by those living in the current seeming timeline, in that illusion of an implacable march of time, so to speak, where you cannot turn back the clock and you cannot know the future. So all you have to work with is the current moment you are perceiving with your senses. In effect, you are trapped within that illusion. But we are here to tell you, through your prophets and residents that get wisdom, that the divine can stretch time to work in your favor instead of against you. So that problem that is breaking in the moment and seemingly one that could lead to catastrophe can be worked on in the past to help reduce the threat so what you fear the most might not come about or be minimized, at least to make it survivable. This is commonplace. Many such healing manipulations are done, and mission lives of those who come to the rescue might be planned, even in a prior generation, to pave the way so someone will incarnate in a particular setting and have a group of individuals help to nurture and prepare them with learning and growth and feedback to encourage their mission life to come to fruition at just the right point in time in the future, to come in and be the boots on the ground, so to speak, who heroically work to save the day. That might not be a recent divine inspiration, helping them make a decision to join the fray at just the right moment, but a long period of orchestration, going back prior to their personal arrival on the earth as an infant, where agreements might be made in the light for a whole group of individuals in support of that heroic figure to work in concert for many years, building up to the current calamity, necessitating their presence and their mission life agenda to come. So, in the case of Joan of Arc, there was much advanced preparation, and the proof is evident from that vision on record about the great need for armor and having a sense it would be a woman involved in taking up arms and coming to the aid of France. That was indeed of long preparation and orchestration to bring about in a time of great need for a genuine hero.
So this is really one of the most fascinating stories I think there is to look at, because here we're actually looking at a prophecy of Joan of Arc. And, the author, Castor, had commented that, the whole story of Joan the Arc is just so incredibly improbable, if you think about it. Because this is a time when women weren't in the military, weren't supposed to have anything to do with the military, much less wear armor, much less be a teenager, you know, wearing men's clothes and getting away with it. Not easily, because it got the attention of a lot of people, and it was one of the reasons they actually burned her at stake eventually. But the fact that she entered the way she did, carried on the way she did, was successful the way she was. It's just so incredibly improbable that it's just begs incredulity, you know. And then on top of that, there's a prophecy about her coming. So what more evidence of the divine do you want, Carl?
Well, there is that thread all through the narrative, and her describing herself, what her day-to-day life was like, and her experiencing and being in communication with the divine realm, because she had a voice in her mind that would come. In fact, more than one who she consulted. And this is the mark of someone who can do true channeling, to talk with divine beings directly. It's a
Yes,
rare gift,
very
but
much so.
someone who has that likely was configured to have that capability before they came into life,
Yep.
because it has to be there for a high purpose and not just an ordinary thing. People were designed to be that way in the very beginning, but then we were manipulated genetically to dim down our intuitive reach. So there are a few who are spared some of that dialing down and are able to access that intuitive gateway more effectively. And she was one of them. And so it is really, truly the case. She was tapped in and she was
Absolutely.
communicating with the divine. And that's how she did what she did.
And we're not just speculating about this, Carl. This is on the record. You know, she was tried before she was burned at the stake, and all that testimony is on record. It's historically validated. She said, this is what I was going through. These are the voices I heard. This is how I was getting my information. You can still dismiss it if you want to, but you can't change the fact that that was her testimony. So it's a really important story. U.S. creator Castor wrote describing the plight of the whole kingdom across great swaths of France, the oppressive and violent reality of armies moving through the countryside, of battles and sieges, pillage and plunder, had left scorched earth, torched homes, and lives and livelihoods destroyed. These were clearly the conditions that Joan's mission life was conceived to resolve. Was it the prayers of the common people of France, a deeply religious and Christian nation, that enabled the divine to intervene in the form of Joan the Maid?
And Creator tells us her participation was planned in advance because Creator was able to see the future and that eventuality of great need, and that many, many people would be praying for divine help and a kind of rescue in response to the onslaught. So this was a disaster that was foreseen, but could not be fully prevented. But in response to the prayers of those affected in that time of great suffering and need for rescue, the divine was able to bring in an orchestrated heroic figure to rally defensive measures to come to the aid of that nation, in providing a counterforce that was in divine alignment, at least in wanting an answer to those prayers for relief and rescue. Many times a divine solution will be a partial one, or have a fatal flaw of some kind that will end up ultimately in failure, despite the lofty intentions and the high purpose in launching the response intended to help. This is because humans are not perfect, and it is their energy always that fuels what the divine can do. So we cannot bring about a solution greater than the magnitude of human yearning and active requests of us directly. People assume that God will see their suffering and be moved to act on their behalf out of compassion and taking pity, if nothing else, because that is what humans would do at a minimum, to at least want to help and would likely jump into the fray, even at their own risk. Such things happen again and again, where someone will jump in swirling water to save a child who fell in, even though they themselves might not even be able to swim. That is a divine act of courage and willingness to even sacrifice the self to help another. It is divinity on display, but it is not necessarily a given that a would-be rescue will be successful. That poor swimmer might not be able to dive in and find a submerged child needing rescue and who is in grave danger. And in fact, that would-be rescuer might themselves perish. So the divine impulse seems wasted in a reckless act. We can tell you it might seem reckless from a human perspective, but it will be a karmic event of great meaning and benefit to all involved, even if it falls short of the intended goal. We would say a life well lived is worthwhile always, even if it is shortened through a misstep that is well intended but leads directly to an early death. Someone who ends up being a martyr falls in the same category of putting their life on the line for a higher cause, and that will always receive divine recognition and grace, if not in the moment, in the future. So this was the nature of what Joan of Arc took on and participated in personally, knowing full well the outcome would be uncertain, but nonetheless rose to the occasion and made a personal sacrifice that was an act of divinity by the nature of the intention and the circumstances in which it was launched.
So we're learning here that, yes, Joan's intervention was the result of prayers, because Creator says emphatically here that nothing happens without requests being made for divine intervention, essentially. And so there's multitudes of prayers, probably said over decades, for the end of all this suffering and warfare. And Joan was the answer to that. But Joan was a spirit also pre-existing her life as Joan of Arc. And so she was in active cooperation, active negotiations with God and other members of the divine realm, and volunteered for the job, Carl. Nobody forced her down here at Spear Point.
Well, and that's what made her heroic, knowing the risks and doing it anyway, just to help. That is the mark of someone truly in divine alignment, willing to give of themselves, even at high risk of personal failure and suffering along the way.
Yeah. You asked Creator, Joan's was not the only mission life on display in these times. The king she was commissioned to support and see coronated clearly had a mission life to bring France's suffering to an end. Castor wrote, the Dauphin, which is the heir apparent to the throne of France, whose daily routine included 2 or sometimes even 3 masses, Catholic masses, so unstinting was his devotion. How important was the Dauphin's own prayers in bringing about the divine intervention in the form of Joan the Maid that would see his mission of unifying France and ending the 100 Years' War truly fulfilled in his lifetime? What can Creator tell us? And I just want to add that he did see the end of the English invasion in his lifetime. He was an old man, and it was towards the middle part of the 1400s, but he did live to see the English leave France altogether, Carl.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. And this is what Creator says. The way divine energies are deployed is that we must treat all equally. In the same way people have similar energy to expend and a similar reach, all other things being equal, of course, people are truly not equal energetically. Some are stronger, some are weaker, some have total belief in the divine, and others are atheists. So their ability to invoke a divine intervention is extremely limited without belief in place, both in the divine and in themselves. Some people are corrupted by the evil intentions of an outside consciousness if there are dark spirits possessing them, for example, or they are being manipulated by other beings or races of beings, as is going on the earth presently. There are many factors in the overall equation of what can happen that will determine what will happen in the end, because the energy will out. There need to be good intentions. There needs to be preparation and a wherewithal. So one has not only the notion to help and good intentions, but the inner capability. Someone who is in good spiritual alignment when requesting divine assistance and strengthening, as well as protection, perhaps for a difficult mission, will have a marked advantage compared to others who simply are thinking like a human and wanting to help someone in need, but and perhaps out of an altruistic impulse, even though they are not truly in tune, consciously and purposefully wanting to partner with the divine and invoke divine participation through a prayer request. So there are many, many variables in what can happen. In this case, the king, despite his lofty stature in the scheme of things, was a single person. He had followers who were supportive, and that is where his influence truly lay. That there was a cohort of individuals wanting to save his throne, essentially, and coming to his aid in the hour of greatest need and using prayer to request divine assistance. That was a significant factor as well in what took place, at least in getting things going to help the nation of France with a favorable outcome, at least for a time.
So we're learning that his prayers were not necessarily any more important than anybody else's. He was just a single individual. He was, however, very, very devout. As I said in the question, he went to Mass 2 to 3 times a day sometimes. And it probably is evidence of why he was chosen to be the sovereign and to have Joan of Arc work to make him king, you know. So he had some merit going for him just to be in the chosen role to be the king that would see France out of the 100 Years' War, Carl.
Well, and there's a wider lesson also that people tend to think I'm one of so many. What does my opinion matter? What does my heart want have to do with changing things for the better? And this is telling us you matter as much as anyone else. You are
Yes,
their equal in the eyes of God. And that makes you potentially quite powerful if you get in a partnership and use that to best advantage. That's what Joan
absolutely.
was doing along the way.
Yes, and your voice is every bit as important as a king's voice, you know, given the context of the times, or even Joan's voice for that matter. You know, I mean, Joan said prayers, but her prayers weren't necessarily weighed any more heavily than anybody else's prayers. The difference is that Joan got responses. You know, Joan got feedback in terms of direct verbal voices in her head, so she had a bit more going on for her than the average person. But in terms of her vote for divine intervention, no more than anybody else's, Carl.
Yes, well, this is my personal experience as well. I can talk to the Almighty, but I don't get special favors. I don't get special treatment. I still struggle. I still am in the dark about many things. I have to learn things the hard way, just like everyone. I do get support for my mission of probing things and bringing information and wisdom forward. But it takes lots and lots of work and effort, I can tell you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. U.S. creator Joan wrote to the English, "You will never hold the kingdom of France from God, the King of heaven, Holy Mary's son. But King Charles will hold it, the true heir, because God, the King of heaven, wishes it." But is this literally true? Creator has told us time and again that this is humanity's world and that no divine intervention can happen without human intention for it to be so. So, can Creator explain how, and even if Joan's common notion of God's will can be understood in the context of Creator's modern teachings that humans really are in charge here?
All right. And Creator says, this is a keen awareness of how historical figures are trapped within their contemporary perspectives in the understanding of the workings of the divine, just like anything else about cultural beliefs that prevailed in their time and place. What you are getting at is quite so, that there is always a divine hope and a divine expectation because the universe has a plan. And that is the foundation of creation of everything in existence. And many things were foreseen and divinely intended to come about because the plan intended to pave the way to make it so. But there was always an awareness that not everything would be under direct divine control with precision because we wanted there to be spontaneity and a possibility of having our creations, like yourselves, able in turn to chart their own destiny and course along the way as an extension of us, but given greater freedom of movement and choice in everything they wish to do or not do than ever before. So, this current version of the universe has within it your galaxy as a testing ground for free agency and free will as an experiment to see, can sentient beings live within that environment but have a long leash, so to speak. So any karmic corrective backlash will be delayed, giving them more room to try things out and even take risks and see what gains can be made that might in turn mitigate the karmic consequences if things are worked on along the way to keep them in divine alignment quickly enough to prevent too many destructive and negative consequences. That experiment is still underway, and the ultimate success or failure to be decided, and by you, in how you do going forward. There is much work to be done to solve the problem of evil. This was the project of Joan of Arc, and a part of this long ago now. This has been a quite long-term struggle and is not over yet, but is coming close to the end. And the jury is still out, so to speak, on whether it will be successful for continuation of humanity with an even wider expansion of your reach and capability in ascending to a higher dimension. So you are free of the limitations and constraints of the physical realm once and for all. It might also be that the experiment is judged a failure through the extermination of humanity in the physical. Being immortal, you will still live on as a light being, but that will mean starting over for this enterprise to have a chance of success. If it fails now, after the quite long-term investment. So much was at stake for Joan of Arc as a divine emissary and would-be champion of freedom. Many such contests have come and gone, most ending in a draw or failing outright. That does not mean things cannot change to be more in your favor. That will be up to you.
Creator's making a lot of points here, and the big one is that even divine agents are captives of their time period in terms of the understandings that are about at the time. So Joan probably didn't have the perspective completely that we have here that we're bringing forward with Get Wisdom, Carl.
Yes, this is the dilemma of the would-be do-gooder, even with divine support and inspiration, guidance, and maybe some protection as well. It
Yeah.
still is up to that person to stay on track, stay on course, and roll with the punches, so to speak, and find ways to advance and not give up
Right.
when things get tough.
And I
So
want to point
there's a
out that
lot that we have to come up with to make this work.
absolutely, and I want to point out that Joan of Arc heard voices and had ability to converse with divine beings and even creator potentially. But we've learned from your experience, Carl, that you're not going to get answers unless you ask the question, right? So Joan was in a similar situation. The divine isn't going to necessarily do a data dump on her unless she makes requests for that. Now, at the time period, she was there for a specific mission, which was to get the king coronated and get the English out of France, which is a quite different mission from the one you're on, Carl, which is bringing divine awareness and new information to bear.
Yes, this it's a different setting and a different aspect of working on the problem.
Absolutely. U.S. creator, divine favor was seemingly on display in the battles leading up to the king's coronation. Castor wrote, "The troops were almost in place when suddenly a stag, or male deer, erupted out of the woods and plunged into the English ranks, precipitating a great shout of confusion and fear just at the moment when advanced riders from the French forces were approaching within earshot. The animal had given away the English position before the archers had finished planting their sharpened stakes in the ground and making ready their bows. The result was the complete rout of the English forces. Was the appearance of the stag divine intervention, or was it karma, or both?"
Creator tells us, you are correct in assuming there was more to the story than a chance occurrence from a wild creature stumbling into the human drama that was being prepared and almost ready to unfold. This was indeed a divine intervention and was orchestrated by the divine realm to create a kind of ruckus, to cause disarray and uncertainty, and help defend the French forces from an English onslaught that would likely end in defeat. This is an example of how the divine realm, in answer to a prayerful outreach, can weigh in about matters not to our liking, but still in support of lofty intentions to some extent. In this case, the idea of war is always a negative to us and unthinkable to light beings like yourself when you are in the heavenly realm. But the contest to be won is here in the physical where you are now, and that circumstance has dragged everyone and everything down to a lower level, a lower standard of behavior, and so that must be dealt with on a physical plane as well. Pretending you are divine and above it all will not protect you. This is because both sides in such a contest enjoy the privileges of free agency and free will and are on their own to see what they can make of it. And thus, both are at risk and both are taking their chances and making a stand. Karma will weigh in as well. And many times, the side that is more in the right will have a greater wherewithal, courtesy of the law of karma, because it represents an excellent opportunity the law of karma can utilize to bring a comeuppance to those in a lesser position morally and ethically. But it is not always the case that the stronger physical force has the most favorable karma as well, or that the weaker party, who is more deserving morally and ethically, can be saved, even by superior karmic history. There are many intricacies in the nature of the karmic energy carried by the participants and what that will mean in terms of an outcome. So, in this case, wanting to be of assistance in answering earnest prayers for support from the divine realm, we were able to add an influence to help the French forces, but without directly killing anyone. And that is quite typical of how the divine realm can use many unexpected and seemingly random, coincidental, environmental manipulations to good advantage to help change things, to delay and sometimes even prevent a conflict. Other examples would include having an abrupt change in weather that takes away the zeal for combat and at least buys time to see if cooler heads can prevail and perhaps find a better solution than warfare.
So we're saying something really quite interesting here, Carl, that the divine will intervene on a particular side on occasion. But the way the divine does intervene is it doesn't participate in direct killing of humans. It still leaves the killing up to the volunteer humans that have decided to engage in the warfare. But it might help one side by, in this case, having a deer come in and causing confusion at a very wrong time, or changing the weather, that kind of thing. So this whole idea of the divine intervening on one side of a conflict is something that I think a lot of people haven't really given a whole lot of thought about.
Well, and we don't have the best teachers, even from the scriptures, I would say. I remember growing up and looking at the Old Testament of the Bible with some very real consternation. All of the discussion about God smiting these people and smiting those people and ordering the deaths of tribes, on and on and on. And we're learning from our discussions with the divine that isn't who God is. God
Right.
does not do those things.
No.
So here is a juicy opportunity to help win a battle for the ones that were more deserving, spiritually speaking. But it was done through an intervention that had nothing to do with bombs and bullets and bows and arrows, but using natural occurring things to help shift the sequence of events. And so that is a very loving touch and not a violent one.
Right. Exactly. You ask Creator, Joan's fortunes changed after the king's coronation. Was her mission in life essentially fulfilled at that point? During her assault on Paris, she rallied her troops, promising them that they would be inside the Paris walls that evening. However, a crossbow bolt ripped through her leg. She did not stop insisting that the city would be won as she was dragged from the ditch and carried to safety. What she didn't know was the king had already made treaties with his enemies to temporarily end hostilities for the winter, taking matters into his own hands and against Joan's wishes and proclamations. What is Creator's perspective?
And Creator says, this points to great wisdom, perceiving how even heavenly support and intentions and planning can be for naught if the people who must implement a strategy or opportunity fail to hold up their end of things, and in making poor choices foreclose the possibility of victory, even when divine support might mean a better outcome, all other things being equal. And this is truly because the divine will work through you. And if it is an indirect intervention, such as adjusting weather to put a damper on things, there must still be a human request to make that happen. And almost always, the execution of a divine strategy will depend on many acts by many individual humans, having within their hearts a divinely aligned awareness that their participation is needed. And they will rise to the occasion to do their part in contributing to what is highest and best as an outcome. But this, of course, is not guaranteed. People will sometimes lose their resolve, surrender to fear, or become corrupted and have their sights lowered or given to temptation if they are bribed in some way to change sides or perhaps ease up their contribution to things. And then the opposition will have a freer hand, and thus the more deserving side might fail in spite of the good intentions and the blessings of the divine. We rely on humans always to do their best because this is a test of them, not of us. We have the power to make anything happen we choose, but that is not the point of your existence. To be a bystander to our whims, to put things in motion, make them change, and bring about outcomes to our liking. This is about you. It is all about you and your fellow beings. You are in a contest between good and evil. And the problem with Joan of Arc in her time of trial was that she ultimately was acting more and more on her own as her support began to erode, and this left her more vulnerable. There are limits in what is possible, and this is true for everyone, no matter their initial strength and wherewithal to win the day, even under difficult circumstances. Everyone has a breaking point and areas of vulnerability that might weaken them, and that can become a downward spiral.
So I think this is very, very important to point out here that Creator is essentially saying that it really wasn't Joan's fault, that it's really a group effort. And if the other members of the group start to fail or falter, that the divine plan that requires on everybody's participation, or at least many participants, probably can't succeed. Joan of Arc was not an island, Carl.
No, she had very much a human level of energy to work with. She had a deeper understanding than most and a deeper faith than most. And that was the gift of her divine connection and being truly tapped in. But she couldn't do it alone. Just like today, no one person can change the world themselves unilaterally. It requires many things to go right and be in alignment.
She was most unhappy after Paris, I can tell you from reading about it, because here she had this string of successes, got the king coronated, and Paris was the first big battle after the coronation. And what does this newly crowned king do? Basically betray her, essentially. She had told him point blank, Paris will be ours if we stay and keep the fight going. And he gave up on the fight. So, there's there's always a wild card. There's always a wrench that can come in out of nowhere, Carl. That's for sure. You ask Creator, Joan's fortunes went from bad to worse when she was captured by enemy forces. The divine favor on full display before the king's coronation was now seemingly missing entirely. A campaign of her own planning was her undoing. Did she go against divine advice, or was this disaster fully karmic? What can Creator tell us?
Creator says, this dark turn of events was due to a confluence of worsening circumstances on the part of a number of individuals, and this included her own limitations as well. Although she had a high level of belief, this led to a kind of complacency that she would be, in fact, invulnerable and would most assuredly be victorious. That is always a danger and a pitfall among the faithful who become too trusting in their expectations that might, in fact, be quite naive in assuming that the side they are on is in the right and must prevail through God's will. And how could it be otherwise? When, in fact, the divine will be on the sidelines in such contests, and even though there is one side better in divine alignment and working for a more lofty goal, it is up to the humans to win the day. Being on the right side confers an advantage when utilized in the right way, especially with awareness that is so, and fueling it with heartfelt prayer, not taking things for granted that the good guys will always win. If there is one thing history has proven, it is that the darkness is resourceful, relentless, and often successful in making short-term gains at least, and that can happen over and over again. This contest of back and forth struggle will continue as long as people are willing to fight with one another. The problem comes when someone decides to resort to an ultimate sanction through bringing about an annihilation of the adversary. The key thing you need to know is that your opposition, all these centuries, has largely been toying with you because it amuses them. They have recently become bent on your destruction. That has been forestalled through the divine realm, but in response, they are upping the ante and working more in earnest to bring that about. The fact humanity does not know this puts them at a disadvantage. And that is why Get Wisdom is here to bring this awareness forward. So there is always karma in play, along with the state of divine alignment and having an awareness of what is needed and making a personal commitment to devote oneself to a cause. There is always a need for a group effort. So even though Joan of Arc has her rightful place in history as a heroic and courageous figure, her dark ending is an object lesson that no one is an island. Not only do you need others to live a life of meaning and happiness, you will need others at times to even survive an excursion in the physical plane.
Well, there's some more tough lessons here, Carl. Creator says that as time went on, there was less and less divine support because people were becoming complacent, maybe having expectations that weren't realistic, including Joan herself. And I can tell you from reading the events of her capture, it's quite arguable that she took risks that she shouldn't have taken. She was reckless in her behavior and in her aims at what she was trying to do at the time. And that was understood because she kind of felt and believed that she was invulnerable and invincible and that God would always be there to pull the strings and make things happen for her. And it's quite a rude awakening that turned out actually not to be the case. And there was a question that was asked for the show, but we didn't have room to fit it in. And that is, was Joan destined, was that part of the plan for her to be martyred? And Creator said, no, it actually wasn't. It wasn't necessarily unforeseen, but it wasn't actually the plan, Carl.
Yeah, and that makes sense because this is up to us. And not even the Almighty can see exactly how things will go in something particularly so volatile and complicated and intricate. And that is part of the point of existence, to try new things that aren't just a cookie cutter of the past. There's a sameness in that is stultifying ultimately.
Yeah.
And so we're part of a tremendous gift in having an unlimited potential being launched here that is innovative, creative, and novel. And we're in the vanguard. So this is a tremendous opportunity, but we have to deal with the problem of evil that has been spawned inexplicably and sadly from that greater freedom. If we do so, we'll get that balance back, and then we'll be really cooking and we'll make some great things happen.
Sounds good to me. You asked Creator. Joan claimed that her voices, her divine counsel, assured her that she would be set free from captivity. Yet that never happened, and she was condemned and ultimately burned at the stake. Did her voices say that knowing that free meant being back in heaven versus being literally released physically? If so, how was this not a kind of divine white lie or lie of omission if Joan understood it to mean release from physical captivity rather than death? What can Creator tell us?
Creator says, what she recorded for history from her witnessing was a work in progress all along the way that was not decided fully until the very end. There were many divine plans at work that could have rescued her if things worked out favorably, and even though that was not a high probability, was still in play. So there was no reason to tell her she was doomed, because that is an absolute, and the divine never deals in absolutes. So even a very encouraging promise of success and a breakthrough benefiting a person that might make them wildly happy and ecstatic even is not a guarantee. Something might still go wrong and change the future in such a way that grand vision is undercut and prevented. What is true is the divine sees future probabilities, but those are never certain. And that is part of the divine plan underway. That is what makes it real. And that is what makes it count. It is not something predetermined, which would make all of you, in a sense, robots following a script, even if unaware of it yourselves consciously. If you are marching to our tune, our plan, our destiny for you, that leaves you nothing to do than be, in effect, a kind of puppet, a robotic being, simply following pre-planned influences that come and go and manipulate you, which would make your own thinking and perception of having choices an illusion and a kind of lie. So what we can tell you about the meaning of life and your role in it, which was just as true for Joan of Arc, is that everything that you do matters. It is life and death always underway, and how things go, favorably or unfavorably. This is all leading somewhere, and that future eventuality will be built on everything that happens in between, much of which is up to you and only in your control, if only to take part or bow out in some way or another. We also have a quite different perspective of adversity, and we can tell you that even a life as lived by Joan of Arc, ending in a tragic and horrific death, was a life of great purpose that served her tremendously, and it will add to a depth of character and awareness that could be gained in no other way. It is your life experience that builds who you are, and you will draw on it over and over all through your vast unfolding future yet to come. that is worth having an early death along the way, even in multiple lifetimes, for the learning it imparts. This is hard for humans to see. It is a divine perspective, but you are part of the divine and the divine plan and mission, and it suits you to be heroic and courageous, even when the odds are against you. It is, after all, who you are and where you come from.
I want to point out from my reading of this that Joan was not, you know, she had her breaking point, and she actually recanted. Maybe not everybody realizes this, but she actually recanted everything that she testified to just before she was put to the flames. And she was sent back to her prison cell and spent the night. And the next morning, she was back in men's clothes again. And so they decided that her recantation was not valid, and so they ended up putting her to death via fire. Immolation is a term for it. In one story I heard, supposedly there was testimony of a guard who said that he ended up swapping out, stealing her dress and leaving her with nothing but the men's clothes that she used to wear to put back on again. Don't know if that's true or not. I mean, we could ask some time, but it's probably not that terribly important. The point is that Joan didn't have a desire to burn at the stake and was terrified of it, in fact, to the point that she actually compromised herself to some extent and recanted what she had testified to. So she was human in every way you could possibly imagine, Carl, but she still at the same time was a heroic, divine figure on a mission life.
Well, and I would say that's what made her heroic, really, when you think about it. It's the fact you're not a superhuman creature, you are a human being with vulnerability, sensibilities, and fragility, and vulnerability, and limits on what you can do, what you can control, certainly.
Yeah.
So this is a huge tragedy, but she had already proved her value, her worth, and the divinity she was following all along to get to where she arrived. And even in that ending, if you know the big picture, that we're working against huge forces of darkness, to have a failing to survive it is not truly a personal failure in the way we might think.
Right.
She was chasing a dream and was reckless, and she got what was coming to her, what was inevitable. You can't fight City Hall, those sorts of ideas. But we're here to fight City Hall. We're here to fight convention and the manipulations that have corrupted the world.
Yeah.
And if we don't change it, it will destroy us. So anything anyone does along the way matters. And look, we're still talking about her as an example of
absolutely.
what can happen.
There was a silver lining to her, martyrdom, because she is much more widely remembered and celebrated as a result of that, and as an inspiration probably on a much larger scale today than would have been the case if she'd have been released. And it's also speaks to the point of maybe why she even incarnated as a female, because a male under those circumstances would have been bartered for another prisoner and traded away back to the enemy, so to speak. But Joan was treated as a witch, and so that whole military tradition of swapping prisoners, it was decided that she wasn't eligible for that, right? So there's just so many things going on here. But as terrible as it was for her, and she didn't want any part of it. But then Jesus didn't want to die on the cross either, to be honest with you. The end result is a much bigger story and has much more implications.
Yeah, indeed.
You ask, Creator, it seems that Joan's mission life was in fact a divine chess match with the interlopers. Can Creator share with us how empowered prayer and the Lightworker healing protocol are the tools needed to bring this chess match to an end in favor of humanity once and for all?
Creator tells us, if you wish to emulate heroic figures like Joan of Arc and take on the darkness in a way that puts you even at risk, you need to know what you are doing, and you need to have the wherewithal to stand a chance in order to make progress, let alone win the day in a long-term contest whose outcome might be quite uncertain and, to a large extent, likely beyond your personal control to begin with. What can even the odds is partnering with the divine. That is how Joan did what she did. The human dilemma has always been that the interlopers are running things and presenting these kinds of contests to challenge you and make you miserable. They are forever allowing a little bit of freedom and then pulling the rug out, letting you breathe free for a time, and then punishing you with adversity of all kinds. They are currently wanting to carry out an annihilation of humanity altogether. They are intellectually superior and technologically superior, having had billions of years to develop their capabilities. You simply cannot compete in a direct contest. So you, like Joan of Arc, need divine assistance to have a chance. You have the advantage of the wisdom imparted through your channel to share tools usable by most of humanity to more than even the odds. The divine holds a far greater power than the interlopers, but it cannot be used unless help is requested from the human side. You need to know what is wrong, what needs changing, and how the divine realm brings healing about, so you can request sufficient divine help in a specific fashion to have the greatest possible intervention weighing in on your side to even the odds and make them in your favor rather than your being the underdog. Empowered prayer is the place to start to work on building your belief in the divine, because it will add to that, as well as allowing us to use your spiritual intention in a way that can be repurposed again and again, and thus amplified and to be pooled with others of like mind, so the aggregate intention of all can be utilized over and over, and thus be compounded and strengthened over time. The Lightworker Healing Protocol is a much more specific and advanced collection of requests for many strategies and tactics and healing interventions to realign, remove, restore, replenish, and heal what is needed to strengthen you and keep you going. And most importantly of all, these tools can be used to heal the interlopers. That is the only way they can be raised up and encouraged to withdraw and leave you alone, so you have a chance to further heal. And that is what needs to happen for ascension to even take place. You must be ready. You must be healed enough to be a match to that higher vibration you will have where you are going. You must be ready for the trip, or you will be left behind. And our intention is for all to be on the journey. So you must look to your fellows and help them prepare, because otherwise they will be a liability for you and the enterprise. As long as the interlopers are holding you down, holding you back, making you miserable, and causing massive suffering across the board through their many strategies to diminish you, cause suffering, loss, and feelings of hopelessness, they will win and destroy you. That need not happen if you stand strong and follow our recommendation here. It is because the representatives of Get Wisdom are asking that we can tell you these things. If you heed our words, follow our recommendation about what is possible, and apply yourselves, you can win the day. And it will be up to you, because your participation is needed. And that is why this exchange has come about. It is to teach you, to motivate you, to invite you, and to enlist you in the cause. If enough of you do not respond and take action to join us, that will seal your fate.
Well, that I think the moral of this story is not just to sit back and marvel at Joan of Arc and give thanks to God for Joan and appreciate Joan and all of that, and that's all good and well, and it's certainly called for. But really, the point is to take action yourself, like Joan did. Don't be sitting on the sidelines and expecting somebody else to come down here and save you. And don't be thinking that there's a divine plan for our ascension, so it's guaranteed to happen. Because we're being told point blank, that's not necessarily the case. That's the plan. But the plans can go awry like they did for Joan in many, many ways. So we have to be on our guard. We have to participate. We have to use the tools that the divine is giving us to bring about the change that we all want, Carl.
Yes, and we've been told this again and again, and that's why we're here. We don't like the fact that this is the way it is. I'd rather have a different kind of projected future, but we do have to deal with it. And in fact, that's why we were created. And so here we are now on the ramparts, and it is up to us, but we've been shown the way and we've been given the tools. This is safe to do. You don't have to go off to war with a sword in hand like Joan of Arc.
No.
You can use divine firepower just through your own requests made to the divine in the right way, in the privacy of your own thinking and your own thoughts. That is doable. We just need a quorum.
Absolutely. And you can help right now, right away, by downloading our book on empowered prayer, getwisdom.com/prayer, and the Lightworker Healing Protocol. Learn about it. Get the ebook, getwisdom.com/LHP. That's all the time we have for today's, I think, epic show, Carl. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Be well.